Chris with the Mobile Internet Resource Center, here to give you our deep dive into Verizon's latest flagship mobile hotspot, the 8800L, the Jetpack MiFi 8800L. So here it is, new from NCGO, and it is replacing the 7730L. This was Verizon's former flagship mobile hotspot, and as you'll see, they are very similar. They actually have the same manufacturer. This one was labeled Novatel. This is NCGO. The company just changed their name behind the scenes. So Novatel, NCGO, same company. Looks almost the same. The 8800 is physically slightly bigger. You would hardly know unless you stack them right on top of each other, but in every dimension it is slightly larger. And otherwise, these devices are very similar externally. Key differences, just to give you a quick summary, the 7730 has an external USB port, a USB-A port that you can use for charging other devices, and an external SIM slot right here, so you can easily change your SIMs without having to get at the battery. The 8800 has neither of those. It has just a power button up top. They both, on the bottom, have dual antenna ports for hooking up external MIMO antennas and USB-C ports. Now, the 8800 still has support for powering external devices, but you have to use a special cable to go from USB-C to USB-A to power other devices. Not quite as convenient. And changing the SIM card requires opening the device up, which I will show you how to do that. So it's got a tiny little fingernail slot on top. You just pop your fingernail in, opens up, and then there's another little fingernail slot on the side of the battery up here by the red side. Pop the battery out, and then there's the SIM card down in there. Hopefully there's enough light to see this well. But then to get the SIM card out, you kind of put your push down with one thumb on there, and then slide in from the other, and just delicately work it out, and you get a little pressure on your finger, and it just falls right out. That's changing the SIM card. Not quite as easy as the slot on the side, but actually not very hard. And that is a nano SIM that goes in there. Now, putting the battery back in, and this is actually the exact same battery. Batteries are still actually labeled Novatel as the 7730. So if you have extra spare batteries from a 7730, you're still in good shape. There we are. Put the case back on. Power this back up. To power on and off, you hold down the power button for about 5 seconds and the screen will come on. And takes just a moment to boot. There we go. Case is back on. Hey, it's a Verizon device. It's worth mentioning this time that even though it is a Verizon device, they are sold unlocked. Like most devices on Verizon, and you can put in other SIM cards, which can be very handy when you're traveling internationally. In the US, this will work with a T-Mobile or AT&T SIM, but it is lacking some of the key bands for each of those carriers. So we have tested this. I actually got some really awesome speeds out of AT&T. I've tried it with T-Mobile as well. It does work, but again, you're missing out on some of the bands, so you'll miss out on a lot of the coverage on those other carriers. But in a pinch, you can get online in some places. There we are, booted up. So now I'm going to give you kind of a quick little tour of the user interface before we dive into the main control panel. So here on the front screen, you'll see your signal strength up top and your battery strength. And normally you'll see a data usage of your current plan right there on the data usage thing. With the Verizon prepaid UDP plan, for whatever reason, that display is still not coming up correctly. It will either display kind of a garbage values of 10,240 or just saying not available at this time. That's not a bug. That's not a problem. Just ignore that for now. Then you can see Wi-Fi on and off, how many devices are connected. We just saw one had just connected. And if you want to see your Wi-Fi name and password, you just tap that button, and you will see that the current primary Wi-Fi network is on, what the password is, what the network name is. Hey, another device just connected, because we've been using this a lot. And you slide your finger back and forth. It's a touch screen. You can see what the guest network is. Guest network is turned off. And then you can instructions of how to connect to the device and actually change the Wi-Fi name and password. You do that via the web interface. Under the pressing your primary, the list of things, you'll see how many devices are connected. There's currently 2 out of the max of 15 that are connected. on the primary network. You can see what they are. And if there's somebody who you've given the password to who's now connecting to your network and you don't want them on there anymore, you can block them and kick them off. And slide over, you see both devices that are connected. Let's go back, jump back to the home, go in here. You can see there's nothing USB tethered, of course, yet, nothing there. And then that's actually your list of blocked devices if you need to unblock somebody. And then over here, you can turn on and off Wi-Fi. You can choose which Wi-Fi bands you're using. I've got the primary network is using 5 gigahertz. Guest network is turned off. I can actually turn on both 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz if I want to use both bands. If you don't have devices that need 2.4 gigahertz and you don't need the extra range of 2.4 gigahertz, you might be better off just keeping things on 5 gigahertz. And there you go. Let's see. Turn off the networks or not. And nope, wrong button. Another device just connected. Okay, this is the band selector, and then Wi-Fi protected setup is if you've got like a printer or some other device that can use Wi-Fi protected setup to quickly connect without needing to type the password on it. That's where you could turn on Wi-Fi protected setup. It's hardly ever need to have a reason to use that. Back on the home display, you can pop into help and you can get a little bit of information, including how to log on to the control panel. It will tell you the current password and the address to go to get to the real control panel, which I'll show you in a second. And that was all under the help screen. And a quick little tutorial, a few other things here. This is where you can learn how to unlock your SIM, how the universal charging works, etc. Under menu, there's a few things you can configure here. It's Wi-Fi and connected devices and data usage. I'll just jump to those things that you could access right from the top. Universal charging is whether you can actually see your battery status and is universal charging being used if you had something connected to that. And software update, you'll see software updates. Under about, this is something interesting to see. I'm seeing sideways. You can actually get your raw signal strength if you scroll down here. So we've got a signal of negative 103 dBs. If you're trying to do some signal optimization, you could see that in your signal to noise ratio there, trying to improve those. And that's the most important information you'd find there under the About screen. And then under settings, a few things you could do. Turning on airplane mode if for some reason you wanted to use this without having the cellular turned on. If you were using it to perhaps share files connected to a USB stick via the file sharing feature. Stealth mode is something I like to turn on. That's turns off any blinking, flashing lights, the screen turning on, and stuff like that. You can also configure these settings via the web interface. I'll show them a little bit more detail there. You could change the alerts, change the screen timeout, and how quickly it falls to sleep. So sleep setting is something you might want to adjust. If you're using this and you want it to be always ready to connect, particularly if you're keeping it powered on, you want to set it to never sleep. Now, let's go back. What else is here? And if anything ever gets confused, factory reset. Advanced settings are not accessible via the LCD interface. You have to do that via the web. And so I think that's a good cue to jump over to the web interface tutorial. Okay, now I'm going to give you a tour of the user interface of the 8800L and show off some of the more advanced options. So first off, to get to the web interface, you connect to the Wi-Fi hotspot and then go to, in your web browser, to my.jetpack. You do http://my.jetpack, and that should bring this up. And if it does not, it's often easier just to go straight to the default IP address, which is 192.168.1.1. Just in case you're referring to a different DNS server or something's going on behind the scenes, this will basically always get you there. So here you are at the control panel. You see what you're connected to. You'll see the data usage. As we said, we've got the prepaid UDP in, so we're not really getting any realistic data usage readouts, but if you have a different plan in, you'd see that here. Some of the same information you had of the primary network on, guest network off, connected devices, MiFi share, whether it's on or off. I'll show that in a second. And then here's where you get at your settings down here, and the About, and so on. I'm going to start by signing in, top right corner. And well, let's sign in, and It'll ask for the password. You'd find the default password on the LCD screen. You can go in and bring up the help screen and you'd see it, and you can enter that there, and then you can have the opportunity to change it to something you'll find easier to remember. Signed in. Hey, there, I'm in. So up here in the top right is where you'd sign in or out. It also gives you the ability to view if you've gotten any text messages from Verizon, or anybody who knows how to send a message to your hotspot. Admin settings is where you can change your Jetpack password, and if you turn on the hide admin password on the screen, then somebody who picks up the screen cannot find that admin password. But then if you lose it, you have to be careful that you might have to do a reset on your hotspot to get that password set back to the default. So if you hide it, make sure you write it down. And then here's a handy thing via the user interface. You can actually restart the Jetpack up here. This is kind of a hidden feature. Some older hotspots did not have the ability to restart them if they were acting funny without going to them in the closet and holding down the power button and then restarting them. So nice to have that. You can do it via the web. Now that I'm logged in, go hide that. Just go through some of the basic settings here. Start over with the Wi-Fi side. You'll see the kind of UI changes once you're no longer at the dashboard. Here, looking under Wi-Fi, I could see, is Wi-Fi allowed? Can Wi-Fi settings be made from the screen? Again, if you think somebody, a kid or a stranger, might be fondling your Jetpack for some reason, you could disable those settings on the LCD screen. Here, you can limit the number of devices that connect from the default of 15. For some reason, you want to have fewer. Turn on what bands you're using. It gives you a little explanation, like 2.4 gigahertz is better for older devices. Well, older devices might only be compatible with that, and it passes through walls better and might have a longer range, whereas 5 gigahertz, much faster and a lot less interference. We try to focus on just 5 gigahertz if we're using the signal over a shorter distance. You have a very few settings you can make around the networks. Under 5 gigahertz in particular, you can choose 802.11ac or 802.11acn. The difference here is if you've got older devices that do not support 802.11ac, 802.11acn means they supports 802.11n mode, and then those older devices will be compatible. I know I don't have any older devices I'm worried about connecting to right now, so I've got 802.11ac turned on, but n is the default. Bandwidth, it defaults to 80. If you're dealing with any sort of interference issues, it might be helpful to experiment dropping that to 40 or 20. Each one of these will drop your local Wi-Fi network speed in half each time, but makes it a little bit more immune to interference. Probably not something you'll need to mess with. The default of 80 is probably fine. And again, channel on automatic, probably fine, unless you know other devices are using specific channels and you're trying to avoid a conflict. That's the Wi-Fi settings there. Under the primary network and guest network, you can set the network name, make it something more interesting for you, set a password. You'll probably always leave this on WPA2 security. You don't want to run a network with no security at all, and very few devices are just require the older WPA there, but you can do that. It can handily generate a random password for you. That's a longer and hard to type one, but you can give yourself something simple and easy too. There you go. And if you want to hide the network information on the screen, LCD screen, you could do that. Turning off the broadcast mode here means your network won't show up when people scan for local Wi-Fi networks. Could be handy if you're trying to remain stealthy. And then this feature here is interesting, Wi-Fi privacy separation. By default on your primary network this is off, and on the guest network this is on, and that means with this is turned on, it's like the devices on the Wi-Fi network can see each other. If it's turned off, they can see each other, and if it's turned on, they cannot, as if they're each one is completely separate and has a private connection to the internet. You'd think if you're on your local network connected with other devices you trust, you want to leave this off so you can still do file sharing between devices, connect to a printer, all the sort of things you would do on a local network if you've got multiple friendly devices. But for the guest network, leave that off. They can't see your file sharing. So here's the changes on the guest network. It's got the same basic options. Over here, the home jumps back to that home screen we talked about. Data usage is data usage screen. It's not super interesting on this particular plan we have. Connected devices is similar to what we'd seen there. For whatever reason, this screen is actually displaying rendered incorrectly, at least on Safari. So you'll see the block buttons do not quite line up with what you're seeing. It's a little awkward. You can hit this little triangle. You'll see a little bit more details about the device that's connecting in that spot. But again, this screen just renders wrong. They've got some UI bugs on it. It's probably best just to ignore this. Next up is MiFi Share. And MiFi Share is a interesting feature some people might enjoy. You turn this on, it actually turns your hotspot into a small file server, and then you can just decide whether you're sharing files with the primary network or guest network. And then this lets you plug in a USB stick or maybe even a small USB drive, and you can share the files on that to any devices that are on your network. It just appears like a network share in Finder or in Windows, and you can share files, make it either read-write or read-only. Either share just a top folder or the entire drive. Again, there's probably better and easier ways to share files, but if you've got something that you need to share in a pinch, like on an SD card and an SD card reader, and you want to quickly copy files around, it's a kind of handy tool to have built in. Now again, you've got to have something that can plug into the USB-C port that's on the 8800. So if you don't have a USB-C compatible plug, you'll need a USB-C to USB-A adapter to use more traditional USB sticks. I'm going to skip Jetpack settings for a second and just quickly show you the help screen. Get a lot of quick little references there. The About screen shows you the status, how long the hotspot's been powered on, how much data has been used in that since power on. And under View Internet Sessions, you can see here how much data during each of the different connected sessions by date. Every time it's been rebooted, it kind of logs it here, how much data it used. But I've noticed this isn't always seemingly correct information, but it does give you a chance to kind of go back in time and see, hey, on November 20th, I used 12 gigs of data. Wow, I was really going to town that day. We've been burning a lot of data testing this. Actually, you can see quite a few of those data logged here. Close that window. Under Jetpack Info here, a little bit about the software version and everything. More interesting here is diagnostics. Under this diagnostic screen, you can see that you're connected via 4G to Verizon, your raw signal strength, your raw signal to noise ratio, and then the primary LTE band you are connected to. So here I am connected to band 2. One thing you do not get displayed here is if carrier aggregation is at work and what your secondary bands are. And the 8800 actually supports up to 5 bands being connected simultaneously, 5-way carrier aggregation. And you really have no idea if that is even happening behind the scenes. It's would be nice just from the geeky standpoint or the debugging standpoint to know if you were connected to other bands, but at least you can see the primary band, and the primary band is the band that is being used for uploads. So if you're trying to tune your boosters or anything like that or understand what's going on, that'll give you that information. And then over here under logs, these are turned off by default, but you can turn them on here. And then I've had them on for a couple days. You can see mobile network log. This is mostly interesting. You'll just see a lot of up and down connection stuff here. But you can see if there was any network drops and restarts. And if there's been an issue some people have run into with this, where for just a second or two or 5 or 10 seconds, the network might drop and come back again. The hotspot will not reboot. You might not even notice it unless you were in the middle of something and you notice a brief few second pause. Checking this log will let you see, was it just, am I going crazy, or really was there something where the network dropped me or not? Under the system log, you can see similarly, if you skim through that, and that tends to have a lot of stuff in it, but you might see some dates of basically January, the non-current date, and that's usually an indication that the hotspot had rebooted. So if you're running into any potential reboot issues, the January's, it hasn't resynced with its date server yet, so it doesn't know the date and time. It doesn't look like we've had any unintentional reboots there. But that's what you can find in the system log if you're trying to troubleshoot or just understand, is my hotspot spontaneously rebooting or is it having little network drops? You can dive into that. Now let's go into the settings over here. Under settings, you've got basic device preferences. This is an important one that I like to set, is what you want to do when you plug into a USB port. And you want to use it just for charging only, Do you want to provide internet over USB and still keep the Wi-Fi turned on, the Wi-Fi from the jetpack? Or do you want to, perhaps you're tethering into a router like a Wi-Fi Ranger or a PepWave, and you want to disable the jetpack's Wi-Fi network and just share your connection over USB only? So you can change those settings there. And often actually just put it on USB only if I'm tethering. And then you could turn off, this is on by default, but this prompt on USB connection gets rid of that annoying prompt every time you plug in where it's asking you to confirm what you really wanted there. So I like to leave that prompt on turn off there. Next up are the important things of how long the screen's on, who cares, but then sleep. And if we're keeping this plugged in all the time, which we usually do have to keep an eye if the batteries ever start to swell, but we like to keep our hotspots on all the time. So we turn the sleep to never, so it's always ready to be connected to, and the shutdown to never, so it will stay awake and always be ready to connect to. Important there. Notifications settings here. This is where you could turn on that stealth mode to get rid of all that screen flashing. And then if you don't turn on stealth mode, there's a lot of alerts that the hotspot can give you. It'll beep every time the battery starts to get low. The screen will flash every time a new device connects via Wi-Fi. You can tweak those here or just universally turn on stealth mode, get rid of all of that. Next up, we've got some... Hello. We've got the hotspot stalling out. Or did I network connection change? We might have just run into the hotspot rebooting or locking up from clicking around too much. Looks like the Wi-Fi network dropped and came back. And hey, there I am back connected. And presumably something, I might be able to dig into that in the log, that there was a reboot and the Wi-Fi went away. It was only out for less than a minute, but something happened there. Probably from changing too many preferences at once without saving. Anyway, back here in the settings, we've looked through all of these. You'll never really need to change the number format on a jetpack for some reason, but that's what's there. Under software update, you can see the last time you checked for a software update, it will automatically check if there's new firmware and will download it, and you really can't even opt out of it. But if you know that there's been a new bug fix release and you don't want to wait for it to automatically find and download it, you can check for updates there. Backup and restore is a place that you can save your settings. This is also where you can reset to factory defaults the jetpack to basically reset it back to ground zero. Kind of handy. Next up is the GPS feature. Most cellular chipsets also double as a GPS because they're used in phones, and the phones have GPS capabilities. And you could turn this on, and you'll get your latitude and longitude and altitude, and well, you'll get a Google Maps that says this page can't load Google Maps. Do you own this website for development purposes only? That is a bug, and we've reported that to Inseego. It means that they have not paid their Google Maps API key or developer key with Google. So I don't know whether this is an Inseego issue or a Verizon issue. Hopefully they'll fix that. That's something on their server end. They just need to pay Google, basically, and then you'll see where you are on a map. If you have any sort of Windows applications in particular that are compatible with Wi-Fi GPSs, you could turn this on and your hotspot will share GPS information with your computer over Wi-Fi. It's kind of an advanced feature. Certain navigation apps for programs for Windows in particular support pairing with a Wi-Fi GPS like that. Next up, we've got the advanced settings here. Gives you a warning saying, hey, don't change any of this unless you know what you're doing, but there's really can't hurt yourself in there. You've got, are you connected to a mobile network? If you have an alternative SIM in there, if you're like traveling internationally, this select networks manually button will scan and show you any LTE networks nearby, and you could try and connect to them. So if you're traveling international and and you're in Canada and Fido might work better than TELUS with your particular roaming plan, you can manually override what it's auto-picked there. And if you are using an alternative SIM, like you've got T-Mobile SIM in, this is where you would put the APN settings for T-Mobile or AT&T. I actually noticed when I put in an AT&T SIM, it actually auto-detected and filled this in properly, so didn't even need to change anything. There's DNS settings, SIM settings. Here's where if your SIM happens to ever end up locked, this is where you can unlock your SIM. The firewall settings here aren't super useful if you have a normal Verizon account, because your outside network is already protected by a firewall and you do not even have a publicly routable IP address, so you can't use port forwarding and port filtering and the DMZ zone. Any of these firewall features really only apply if you have a external public internet address. Again, you can block, this is where you can block different devices in a more advanced way by MAC address. You can see your LAN settings here. Again, things you will hardly ever want to change, but they're there to know about. Port filtering, port forwarding, rarely used. And then finally it gets us to the last of the advanced settings. This is the VPN feature, and this is new to the 8800. This is the first time we've seen a hotspot with its own built-in VPN client. And what this will let you do is establish a secure connection from the 8800 to a VPN server someplace, and nobody in between can snoop on you. Well, that's usually a very handy feature when you're connecting to public Wi-Fi networks, but you already have a secure connection between your cellular device and the internet, and that's called Verizon. So VPN here is basically preventing Verizon from snooping on you. That's the only people that you're kind of hopping over on your way to a VPN server, unless you're connecting to a corporate VPN server. But there are some interesting reasons why you might want to prevent Verizon from snooping on you if you are concerned about Verizon's ad tracking and building up profiles of you, or if you want to get around Verizon's various throttling on certain plans. So, for example, most Verizon plans throttle video speeds to limit them to either 480p or 1080p, which is basically a 10 megabits per second video throttle behind the scenes. So if you want to get around this throttle, Verizon's built in a feature now to do it. You just now, instead of paying Verizon, you have to find a fast enough VPN service. And it turns out a compatible one. This is supposed to work with any OpenVPN compatible VPN server, but it really does not. We've only found one so far that it works with. That's NordVPN. We've tried ExpressVPN, it did not work. And we tried LimeVPN, it did not work. We've also heard IPVanish does seem to work. But let me show you how to set this up, because it is a little bit confusing. So first off, I'll show you fast.com is how you can see your video speeds, your speeds to Netflix basically. And let that run and see what our current speeds are with no VPN going through on this connection. And you're coming in here just under 10 megabits per second, which is what you expect. That's Verizon's video throttle. You'll see here a speed test I ran just a few minutes ago without non-video side, just a speed of.me, and I was getting 35 megabits per second. So that's Verizon's video throttle at work. But now I know NordVPN actually is compatible, so I've got an account with NordVPN, and I can go here to their site once I have an account, bring up the servers list, and because NordVPN has 1,900 different servers, you need to know what server you want to connect to, and press that servers button up top and then say recommend a server. And it comes up with there, this is the server we recommend for you based on your current network location. And I'm like, okay, I want to see the available protocols, and I'm using OpenVPN. UDP or TCP should work, but I'm going to use OpenVPN TCP, and now I download this configuration file, and that file comes shooting on down, and 1787 NordVPN. So now I go back over to the MiFi's control panel, and let me reset this, clear all VPN settings, start from scratch. And it says drag the file from your VPN provider here, and let me pretend I just dragged that in. I'm going to actually try and see if I back out of this without saving changes. It'll save it, so I don't have to go reset the password. Nope, okay, it's all reset. So, okay, I'm going to drag in the settings file I just downloaded, drop it here, and okay, I think I've got a password and configuration set. So now I will say connect. And this theoretically should be all that is required. And yes, there I am. Now I am connected to a VPN. And you'll see it starts counting up the time. And let's go over to fast.com and see if I've now burst through Verizon's video throttles. And behind the scenes, the network has not caught up yet that it has changed. Force the page to reload. We have seen this before, that the Netflix server sometimes takes a second to respond to being behind a VPN, or this actually could be the case that Netflix does not support people using a VPN. They try to block them, and they might have detected that the server I happen to connect to is a VPN, and they have engaged their block. So that might be the case, but we have another test. We were actually seeing full speed ahead via connecting on Netflix and streaming 4K. But again, always streaming with Netflix, it's a bit of a game of whack-a-mole with VPNs, of maybe finding a different server that worked. And so go back to the NordVPN, request a different VPN server, or download their complete list, because they've got 1,900 of them, and play a little game of trial and error. Is that more trouble than it's worth just to get away from 1080p video to 4K? Well, depends what you're really into, but that's a feature that is there. And again, also, if you've got your own VPN server and you're trying to connect to a corporate VPN server, or one that you might run for your own reasons, if it's OpenVPN compatible, hopefully you'll be able to make this work. So that is the settings there. One final button is the view log. You can see any VPN logs and potentially try and debug any issues, but it does not give you a lot of error messages. You will, if your file is incompatible for whatever reason, and most of the VPN services we tried, you drag the file there, and the configuration file just says invalid, no error, no further information whatsoever. So I think that is basically it, the complete tour of every nook and cranny of the 8800L and how to configure and set it up. One other feature I didn't mention, this Auto Connect VPN. If you have a VPN that you're liking using and you want it connected all the time, as soon as the hotspot power's on, it just always starts that connection. Turn that on and it will keep the VPN connected all the time. And actually, there it is, starting to try and connect again. So there we go. That's the full tour. I think every nook and cranny covered. Thanks for listening, watching. Quick little addendum, I actually rebooted the Jetpack after I was having those problems connecting to Netflix with the VPN engaged. Restarted it and got the VPN in auto connect mode, and was getting decent 20 megabit down and 17 up via regular direct speeds, and now look, 23 megabits per second via Netflix. That should be enough to stream in 4K. It seems like the Netflix servers were happier once the hotspot had rebooted and probably got a different IP address. So there we go. It's actually possible to break out of Verizon's video throttle using a feature that they've built into their latest Jetpack, if you really, really want to do that. There you go.